I was like, somebody's speaking.
Okay, so this is the last week we'll be doing our cultural exegesis, and there's 4 things that culture does. And I would love to hear, what are those 4 things that culture does?
Communicates.
Boom, there's one.
I forgot the rest.
Uh,
That's the most important thing.
That is technically the definition or an explanation, but there are 4 words. So culture communicates. So it communicates a vision or kind of a meaning of life. Culture orients. So it gives us a sense of direction. Culture reproduces. So it spreads beliefs and values and ideas and practices from one group to another. And finally, culture cultivates. So it shapes us. It's almost like spiritual formation, along with church and stuff like that. There is a method of interpretation to looking at cultural things. Does anybody remember what that method of interpretation is?
Jesus.
Good, cultural exegesis, but how do we go about that?
I don't know. Check it out.
The world behind, the world of, and the world in front of the text is what we've been doing. So looking at the background information as much as we can about something, looking at the actual text itself, whether that be a movie or a book or a song, and then in front of the text, so what it means to us. The ways that we're trying to do this, to accomplish this, is we're going to try to comprehend a cultural text before we interpret it. So take the time to actually read or watch or listen before we give our own interpretation. Identify what we think culture is trying to say through that particular text. Consider the world behind, of, and in front of it. Determine the power served by it. Seek its hypothesis or root metaphor, its meta-narrative. Be comprehensive. Give thick descriptions. Don't reduce it. So, in other words, just because it's not your cup of tea doesn't mean you shouldn't engage it. So just because you don't like country music doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to it. If someone brings it as a cultural text. That was kind of our thought. What does this cultural text say about being human? Discern what faith or cultural text expresses and locate the cultural text within the biblical narrative. So the final thing that you would ever do within cultural exegesis is project it into your faith. You would analyze it as much as you could, the world behind, of, and in front, and then take it to your kind of faith walk and your journey and try to put it into the biblical narrative. So that's what we've been trying to do over the last few weeks. And our last 2 subject matters, luckily we have both of our wonderful people who brought that to us here tonight. And so I'm going to give Inlot a chance to share a little bit about his cultural text, which was Tyler Perry's A Diary of a Mad Black Woman, the motion picture. Inlot, if you would, just share a little bit about any kind of background information you might know, a little summary of the movie itself, and then why it's meaningful to you.
So basically, Tyler Perry came up with this idea of Medea based on what I believe was his like kind of an interpretation of his grandmother, and so he made these movies depicting this character Medea. I think he made 3 actual motion pictures, and this particular one, kind of a synopsis of it is there are 2 characters, a man and a woman, who are married. The man is a very high-profile attorney in the Atlanta area, and his wife is just, you know, a lovely wife. She's a stay-at-home wife. She takes care of the house and all that kind of stuff. So they've been married for 18 years, and all of a sudden, one day, she comes home, and all of her stuff has been moved out into a moving van. And she doesn't know what's going on. Well, apparently, he has been having an affair with the same woman for like the past 6 or 7 years, has a couple of kids with her, and now he's decided that he is going to leave his wife and bring this other woman into the house. And so the wife's life is basically turned upside down, and so she really doesn't know what else to do. So she does the only logical thing in her mind, and that's go to her, I believe this is her grandmother, Medea. And so Medea's crazy, but she has a lot of real-world insight and suggestions on what she should do in her current situation. And long story short, she ends up getting a divorce, and there's a lot of other stuff that happens in between there. I don't know who actually had a chance to watch it, but most of it's pretty comical that involves Medea. They do some pretty illegal things, and it's I think it's a good flick. So yeah, why it's important to me, I think that beyond the comedy of it, I think that it has some important, valuable lessons in that you should always value your family relationships, and you should never take that for granted. I think there was some of that in this movie that the female main character kind of took her grandmother figure for granted and never went to visit her, and never really went to visit her own mother, and so it kind of taught her a lesson about family and about how they're always going to be there for you no matter what, and it kind of teaches you about loyalty, and so yeah.
Okay. All right, so for those of us who got a chance to watch it or have seen it before, I guess maybe just share a little bit about, things that stood out to you in the movie. Marissa and I watched it together last night, and the first thing that I have to say about it is it wore me the hell out. It was there were some hard things going on in that movie, along with the comedy stuff, but it was just so abrupt how it changed from, oh, this is really funny, to what the crap, this is really harsh, or this is really hard to watch, or something like that. It just switched really dramatically and drastically, and there were some things I wasn't expecting towards the end of the movie that I thought were quite weird, and surprises about how the relationship took over, and how Helen is the wife's name, who goes back to Charles. One of the things that happens is Charles is a huge jerk, by the way. He is like the epitome of jerk, and he's a defense lawyer, and he's got some thug that he defends, and he doesn't get him off, and in the courtroom the guy grabs one of the bailiff's guns and shoots Charles and paralyzes him. And Helen decides that for some reason or not, she wants to go and help him, and so she's by his side throughout his hospital stay until he wakes up, and then she takes him home and tries to help him, and there's this scene where they're in the office, and she's trying to find some sort of paper, and he treats her like he normally did, and tells her she's nothing, she's an idiot, and she finally just flips her lid. She's had enough of that. She tells him what the business is going to be, and she starts doing these really harsh and mean things to him. There's one scene where he can't move at all. From his neck down, he's paralyzed. And she throws him into the bathtub, and he's sinking in, drowning. And then she finally picks him up at one point, and they're eating at the table, and he can't feed himself, and she's over there eating a nice salad. And
you gotta stop that. First, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but you gotta tell that he didn't just cheat on her and have this baby with some other woman. He told her by bringing that woman into their house and telling her to leave. And then he dragged her out of the house in front of the other woman and sent her off in this movie, man. It was... So you can't just go straight to her doing terrible things. You have to give at least a little bit
I was just trying to explain the movie so drastically. Thank you, Henny, pointing out my flaw in my narrative on that.
Well, I grew close to that main female character during my time with her and Medea last night, so I got a little defensive, honey. I'm sorry.
I understand. Our relationship reflects Helen's and Charles a lot. You wouldn't want to emphasize that. Yeah, so to me, you know, like I said, it just kind of wore me out watching it because it was just so like abrupt. Some of the like comedy versus like the seriousness of the movie. It was hard to watch some of that. Just seeing Helen and Charles and how they both ended up mistreating each other, mistreating. I know that's an understatement. It was a lot worse than that. Anybody else, things from the movie that stood out to you?
I thought Medea was hilarious. She made me laugh every time she was on the screen, and a lot of the comedy parts were funny to me, but I thought they did have some like really deep like social issues in there with the cousin whose wife was like a drug addict and had to like be away from the family because she wouldn't give up her habit, and he like continued to love her, and it talked about his deep love for her. And then watching the kids like interact with her, it was just really hard to watch. That and oh my gosh, what is the name of the actor that's like the male lead? Not Charles, but the
Orlando's his name in the movie.
Orlando. But what is his real name?
Well, I got the IMDb page pulled up on my phone.
He's the tall black guy on Criminal Minds.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's his name?
Shamar Moore.
Oh,
He
yeah.
is so fun. He is so fun. But he does not need to have those dreads. They were terrible. They were so all like nappy and like curling around by his neck. I'm like, stop! Oh, you're ruining it. Anyway, no, it was. I really enjoyed it. I'm like, those are my deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts with Marissa. He's so fine.
I thought it was so weird, her relationship with Orlando, because she's very, you know, they start off like where he's the driver for the U-Haul truck that Charles rents to put all her stuff in and kick her out of the house. And so they have like this scene where they're fighting, and she eventually kicks him out of the U-Haul, leaves him stranded, and he shows up at Medea's house for a house party, and so they have a little scene there. But then they start to fall for each other. He takes her to this jazz club, and they start to have this relationship blossom. And so you see this love, like she finally realizes like what a good man's like. But when Charles gets shot, all that goes to hell. She leaves Orlando, doesn't talk to him, tries to break up with him, and so it's just strange. Like that dynamic of the relationship, I thought was very strange. Like her trying to deal with her own demons and like still having that pain and hurt from how Charles mistreated her, and her not being able to commit herself to a real good relationship because of that. I thought that was a part of that storyline of her trying to forgive herself, and so she finally does. One of the things that Emlite forgot to bring up, since we're calling out each other's narrative points, is the divorce they get is not like, oh, they just get a divorce. Oh, no. She nurses Charles back to health. He starts walking. There's this awesome church scene where he goes up front and gets Jesus, and then the mother, who's an addict, shows up, starts belting out this song, and it's beautiful, and she comes and gets Jesus. They're all hugging and loving, and they have this family dinner at Medea's, and she pulls out the divorce papers at this family meal. Like, boom, I want a divorce right here in front of everybody.
That was crazy.
Which is funny because when you watch the end credits, like in the movie, there's like outtakes or bloopers, and Medea is like calling them out, like, I bet you feel like a fool sitting here getting divorce papers, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So, I don't know. It was such a strange dynamic of relationships, and I didn't know. I don't know. I've been in weird relationships, but I've never been in those.
I mean, y'all right.
But it was such an odd, like, scene right then. I didn't know how to feel. Like, I'm supposed to feel good for Helen that she's finally forgiven herself and forgiven Charles, and now she wants to be with Orlando. But I was almost like, man, how does Orlando just take her back after all that mess? I don't know. That was hard to understand. Anybody else? Thoughts on Medea? Imlot, do you have any favorite scenes or anything that stands out to you that you like?
I mean, any of the scenes that include Medea and Joe were
Right. Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Yeah. Is that her brother? Is that who that is in the movie?
Yeah, that's Medea's brother. And you know, I don't know. Beyond, some of the scenes were kind of weird. I will grant you that, but I think that the comedy far outweighs the negative on that myself. And I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely funny parts. I definitely laughed. Like, when she first shows up and Medea's got a gun in her purse, and like throughout the whole rest of the movie, she has this gun that she continuously pulls out on people, like when they're trying to talk mess to her or say something.
Yeah, that was my favorite scene with her brother, is when he's like talking trash. You so big, da 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 da. I don't know what all he said. And she was like, say one more thing. And she like cocks the gun in her purse. It's hilarious. And he like gets up and walks off. And, like, just like putters off. But not like he's afraid. Just like, I guess I should stop now. It's hilarious.
There's right after Helen goes to visit Medea and she tells her what happened, they go over to her old house where she just got kicked out, and they break in and they start ripping the clothes. And so Charles and his, fling show up, and there's this scene, and all of a sudden they hear this chainsaw, and Medea's downstairs like saying that she deserves half of everything, so she starts sawing all the furniture in half. And I had to think, like, there are people watching that going, I wish I would have done that when somebody wronged me. I just went crazy and ripped all her stuff and destroyed it. And I remember there was girls in high school that used to like have a burn party when their boyfriend broke up with them, and they'd put it in a pile and set everything that they ever got from this boy on fire.
They used to get friends, and like they set the house on the apartment on fire. Every day people get stranger and stranger with the stuff that they do to each other.
So, all right. Well, any other scenes or thoughts about the movie before we go into the idea of talking about the themes that come out of the movie? Well, I guess we can talk about themes that come out of the movie then. I think one of the things I noticed is that lots of Hollywood movies, faith doesn't play a huge important role, but this was just, it was interesting to me how they threw faith into the movie, that it was just a part of the dialogue and a part of what was happening, and like going to church and those scenes, like that was just a part of what happened in the movie. You just don't see that a whole lot, I guess, in movies like that you just go see. You don't see scenes. The last church scene I saw before Medea is I was watching The Following with Marissa, and they're having like a killer in there killing people in this church. And
Megan was watching that under duress. It's not like my scary TV show.
But so faith to me, that played a huge role. I think that's one of the things that I noticed the most, and what part it played in that movie.
Family to me too, like the bonds of family and how they took care of each other, even if it was with a chainsaw.
Yeah, how each other had their backs, and even though like they weren't all together, and there was a part where Helen talks about how Charles had made her ostracize herself from her family and her friends, like though she wasn't close to them necessarily over the last few years. When she got back with family, like there was still kind of that nest and that care for her. There's a scene with her mom that she feels guilty she put in a home, and she has this conversation with her mom that I thought was nice in the home. Any other themes?
Revenge.
Yeah. There was a lot of revenge.
I think there was kind of a fear of change on Helen's part. You know, it's like when she got thrown out of the house, it's like she was so helpless. She didn't know what to do. Like Medea is kind of the one that had to tell her. You know, she's like, you go out and get a job. You can do stuff. You know, she's like, I can't do anything. She's like, I've never had a job before. So I mean, you know, I think she was afraid of having to get out of her comfort zone and actually, like, you know, take care of herself.
Sure. I thought there was a good contrast between a very unhealthy relationship versus a very healthy relationship, and how unhealthy, it takes time for it to get out. It takes time for it to get rid of. That a healthy relationship sometimes doesn't have as tight of a hold as an unhealthy relationship, it seemed, at least in the movie. She had a hard time breaking from that unhealth between her and Charles. Another thing that kind of popped out to me when I was watching it was forgiveness. That's a big part of the film, and that's kind of how everything ends up good in the end, is because everybody's able to forgive one another. Charles has a scene with Helen where he, finally, asks for her forgiveness and tells her how sorry he is for the way he was. And then Helen kind of goes through this process of healing through helping Charles get back on his feet, and then finally seeking that divorce, that final forgiveness of, okay, let's, we're good, so let's end on this term. It's not an unhealthy, like,
Whoa.
I'm angry at you divorce.
Whoa, did you just say that final forgiveness with divorce? What? Sorry, I just didn't clarify that. No.
Well, yeah, it was a part of the final forgiveness for her, though.
Divorce?
You didn't watch the movie?
I know, I'm saying I'm not sure that the theme fits in right there with divorce. That's because I'm married to you, so I want to make sure you don't try to apologize to me later.
Once again, our relationship's so much like Charles and Helen.
My dad's just Medea. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think in this situation, though, the divorce papers were essentially a way of them to throw in the towel of their major fighting. I think because, in that particular situation, the divorce is sort of them letting go of all the animosity for all that.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
That makes sense.
Any other themes stick out to y'all? Well, Emlot, thank you for bringing Medea's movie to our attention. I did watch it, and I did laugh quite a bit. I was also exhausted when I got done with the film, which is, it's silly to say this, but really I've watched two movies that have really worn me out in my life. Hunger Games wore me the hell out. Now, A Diary of a Mad Black Woman has wore me out. I don't think I'll revisit either one, but I'm glad that I got to see it, and I did, take it in this time.
Well,
All right.
I'm glad I was able to present a challenge for you.
You were. Definitely were. You definitely were.
I'm glad we cleared up some of those misconceptions you had, honey.
I never watched any of the Meet the Parents series.
Oh, Lord,
That didn't
that
wear me out, just not good.
Those wear me out.
makes me nervous.
So, the last thing that we're going to talk about is a book that Amy brought us as our cultural text called A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers. And so, Amy, if you would just kind of frame it a little bit, just tell us any kind of background information that you know about the book or about the author. Tell us about, I know you can't tell us all about the book because it is a lot to talk. So maybe just a bit of the text or the book, and then why it's meaningful to you.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I forgot the sheer amount of cursing there was in this book. There's a lot of it.
You remember we just listened to the Book of Mormon soundtrack? This was like
this is a lot. Like I reread it, and so what it is it's a memoir of his journey from his parents died within 32 weeks of each other. And so that's the jumping off part, was him dealing with his mother's cancer and his father's death, because everybody was waiting for his mother to die, and then his father died first. And then after that, he becomes sort of the father figure for his younger brother, who's 8 years old. And they leave their hometown in Illinois, which is more of a suburb from Chicago, and they just go to San Francisco, sort of in the boom, like before it started really booming into what San Francisco is now, sort of techie cultural hub that it is now. And sort of the adventures of him being both the brother and parent, and then what I think is sort of like the nice little central part of him being interviewed for Real World, which really fills in a lot of blanks and everything, and then it sort of ends with him trying to gracefully scatter his mother's ashes after they're finally sent to him after a period of time. And yeah, so it was a really dense book. I don't remember it being that heavy, but it is pretty heavy. So that's sort of like the over-sweeping summary of it. There's people die in it, and lots of strange adventures of slightly good and slightly bad parenting. So when I was rereading it, I really figured out why I loved it in the first place, and then rereading it, I enjoy it for a completely different reason. The first time I read it was 4 years after my father died, and I really I was drawn into the whole question of mortality, and all of that. It brings up a lot of questions on how to deal with death and how to really adjust and go forward, because you have to. And then rereading it, it sort of applied more to me because it has a lot of parenting things, some questionable parenting, such as he's a slob, and I sort of consider myself a slob, but then he's sort of, I'm way better at being a parent than all these other people, and he has this concept that he can imprint his exact ideas on his child, and I've had that, feeling before. So, yeah, but it's really a great book. I love that book. But okay, that's my oversweeping, laconic version of it.
Thank you. Well, I didn't get to read the whole book. I'm around page 170, so just around the part where you were talking about he interviewed for Real World. He started talking about Real World.
Yeah.
And that kind of conversation about getting folks hired into their magazine that they're starting. So that's where I got. But the parts, I'm going to finish it because it is awesome. I love the author and how he has this inner dialogue with himself about all these different situations. Like, lots of that stuff I could really resonate with, and I really found hilarious, like how he would talk about stuff and get into things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing it, but my point of reference is only going to be the pages that I got to read and not the whole book.
It is a little bit exhausting to read because it really draws you in, and it's very detailed and very dense. But I find that the emotional, writing of it is very comforting to me, and the way he writes and the way he goes into his mind and has these scenarios. The part where they moved to California and he's talking about how awesome that him and Toph are going to have it because they'll know exactly what each other's thinking, and they will just work together, and that's sort of like the naive way he thought everything was going to happen. But then there's the questionable parenting part where he's like, why do you suck at hitting the ball? And stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's I don't know, it's an emotional roller coaster to read.
Yeah, some of my favorite parts are him, and I think his brother's name's Toph. Is that how you say it?
Well, it's Christopher, so it's either Tough or Toph. I always called him Toph.
Yeah. But so like I wanted to read some of these passages because they're crazy. Like I love how he talks to himself and what he says and stuff. So this one was I guess they're on the beach, and this is right after a conversation they have about him paying him to build sandcastles because he's bored. And so he moves on from that, and this is page 66, the last paragraph, and he starts thinking about all this stuff that he's going to have to do for his brother, and he's like, there's so much I have to do. I try to think about everything coming soon, all the things we need to do when school starts, and all this becomes real. But one thing that Toph must see a doctor, must get a physical, breaks through, and now my head floods. Fuck, I have to get a resume together, and we have to find a new place to live when the sublet ends. And how will Toph go to school if I can't get an early job? Will Beth, one of his sisters, pull her weight? Will she be too busy? Will we kill each other? How often will Bill come and visit L.A.? How much should I, can I? Will I burden Kristen? Will she even be around? Will she mellow when she finds a job in a car? Should I light my hair? Does that whitening toothpaste really work? Toph needs health insurance. I need health insurance. Maybe I'm already sick. It's already growing inside of me. Something, anything. A tapeworm, AIDS. I have to get started. I have to get started soon because I will die before 30. It'll be random, my death, even more random than theirs. So, like, he just, in the midst of, like, thinking about his brother and, like, what he has to do for him, all of a sudden he starts thinking about, should I light my hair? This tooth whitening stuff works. I think I'm already sick. I'm probably going to die. I should probably do something about that. I thought that was hilarious, and I think about, like, him being so young. I guess he's 22, 21, something like this at the time.
He's 21, yeah.
Yeah, just this stream of consciousness of thinking about everything. Lots of conversations like that made me laugh.
Right, and a lot of his panic is it focuses around worrying about himself or his or Toph dying. He's obsessed with it. It's something that happens when your parents die. Is you realize your own mortality.
Sure.
So the part where he well, I don't want to ruin the book now, but he loses Toph and he thinks he's been murdered and thrown into a ditch, and he goes into this massive panic. And I've experienced that before. Like, well, it was today. Like, babysitter was 10 minutes late today, and all of a sudden I'm in a panic. And so it's like a modern day James Joyce sort of Ulysses situation, but a lot more comprehensible. I mean, but yeah, the book is fantastic. Everybody should read it. I don't know if anybody got very far or read it, so. But.
In line, I know you read a lot of it.
Yeah, I actually finished it today during one of the annual conference sessions, so that tells you how.
Shame on you, Mr. Delegate.
It kind of shows you how riveting the whole annual conference session was. So,
Riveting, huh?
yes.
Well, I'm now worried because you were reading that last page, and that last page is the most stream of conscious, panicky part. And
yeah. Well, I was kind of looking around at times to see if people beside me were like kind of glancing down to read, because, like you said, there's a lot of cursing in this book.
Well, and that last page is just like two words, really, over and over and over again.
And one person, one of our delegates from Emmanuel, Christy, she was like, is that a good book? I was like, it's a very good book. It has vulgar language in it and everything. And she's like, oh, I'm gonna write down that. I'm gonna actually read that book. And I was like, okay, I'm just warning you. But yeah, I mean, it was a very, very good book. It was extremely tiresome though, because I mean, it is that whole stream of consciousness writing, and you know, I think he's borderline schizophrenic almost. Some of these sections are like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe he's like, I mean, he's writing that down, it's in his mind, but I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were so many little details that I hadn't remembered because everything gets thrown in. It's just so very frenetic. But, like, I had completely forgotten that he spent, like, 5 pages talking about Mr. T and trees.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, wow. And I'm like, I wonder what everybody else thinks about this because I forgot all about how vulgar the language is. But he's an amazing writer, even with the language.
He is.
Another thing, go ahead, Amon. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, one thing that I noticed and that I appreciate about books that I read is that there were 0 typos that I found, or there were no grammatical errors or anything. So that made me appreciate it even more because I'm kind of like anal retentive about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't notice those things. So I love. There's this really. Like I said, I only have a few pages that I've read. I haven't read the whole thing, but I really love this other section. You were talking about him worrying about Toph and like dying. There's this part where he finally gets this babysitter to come, and he gets to go out and have this night of debauchery, basically. And immediately, like 10 minutes after he leaves his house, he feels guilty and he thinks his brother's going to die. Like the babysitter's going to murder him. He's going to come back and he's going to be dead. But he still goes out. But in the midst of like hanging out with his friends and stuff, he has these thoughts about his brother getting killed or end up missing and blah, blah, blah. And then all this other stuff happens. He ends up at the beach with this girl. Then people start like messing with him. And he can't find his wallet. He thinks he stole it. So he goes, tracks these people down on the beach, tells them to come look for the wallet. Then he says he's going to call the cops. They go to find a phone. He's mistaken. There's no phone. He gets kicked in the balls. They run off. He almost gets hit by a car. Takes this girl home and realizes his wallet's still at home. He never had his wallet. I think about that panic in me, not necessarily with a kid, but like there's been times where this almost happens daily with me. I always forget like my wallet or my keys. I cannot find my wallet or my keys for some way, and I have this panic come over me like, oh crap, what did I do with them? And they end up being in like the most obvious places that they could have been. Like they're on a counter that I would normally set them at, but for today, I just thought that they were somewhere else, and I look everywhere else besides this counter.
Your keys are in the bottom of your purse, and you've like searched your entire house, and then you clean out.
Yeah, and then you clean out the purse. Yeah. So I love that whole section and those stories of what happened that night. I thought that was really good. And the beginning of the book, once you get past, like, I didn't read much of the preface because he told me to skip it.
Well, you shouldn't have because it is sort of genius. And
yeah, I'll go back. Yeah, I'll go back to it. But just the opening pages of him talking about in detail his mother's illness and like what she's dealing with, I thought must have been really hard for him to write. But then again, maybe very cathartic to be able to say that he noticed it in that much detail. I can't say that I can remember that much about people in detail like he did, but maybe it was just so vivid in his mind because of what she was going through. He was able to write that down. But I thought that was some of the most descriptive things I've ever seen about someone's illness and what they're dealing with. And her attitude towards it, like, there's a long dialogue about her bleeding nose, and, she refuses to call a nurse.
Pages long.
Huh?
It's like pages and pages long where he's
right. And it's just all about her bleeding nose.
Because the nosebleed.
Yeah, they think that she should go to a nurse, and she's like, I'm fine. It's no big deal. And I thought that those were good. It was a strange way to open a book.
Well, I mean, it's a very strange way, but it's almost like it's like bookends because it starts out with the panic around his mother and the illness, and then it ends again with his mother.
Yeah.
So I see how he put it together was essentially like really the beginning of her death, and then him finally dealing with it and trying to scatter the ashes in somewhat of an trying for it to be elegant and him not even realizing what death was really like after cremation, and it's sort of just that slice of life of I can see why he chose that to be the beginning, and he touches upon how weird death was in the suburbs, and so him starting with that weird part of his life and then finally finishing the death, really, of his mother in his mind by scattering the ashes. So I don't know, I'm really close to this book. I really love this book, and rereading it for this was really fantastic, I thought, and cathartic. So.
Well, I'm glad that you brought it up, because once I started reading it, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to finishing it.
Just even the writing itself is a little addictive to read, probably because of the way he thinks.
Yeah.
So themes that kind of pop out. It seems like there's only 3 of us who've read it, so I'm going to get through this pretty quick. Death and dying. I mean, that's definitely a big theme. I think another one is being young and just what you go through as you mature and start to think things through that you haven't ever encountered before, and how hard that is to remember how difficult it is to think through those things. Some of us are older now, so we don't. Some of this stuff would just seem like silly to think about, but it was to me it was interesting to read about his angst and his worry about his brother, and yet his, like you said, weird parenting choices for someone who is so worried about their brother and some of the stuff, and their conversations of how they talk to each other. He almost talks to him like he's just like another dude, not this 8-year-old, which I think is hilarious. He just talks to him like he's, his age.
Yeah. And I mean, the theme of parenthood, actually, it's sort of his own youth and how it was cut short, but also trying to be a parent, because he's trying to relate to, he wants to relate to these other mothers at baseball practice, and he can't, because they think he's just like the big brother taking everybody around, not like the actual parent now, instead of just the mother. So I thought it was a lot of parenting themes whenever, he loses him and everything like that. But also a lot of Generation X stuff where they're very concerned with themselves, even though he's not really as self-centered as he thinks he is. But it's very, it seems to worry about the theme about being self-centered, while in reality he's not really as self-centered as he thinks he is. And that's more in the real-world interviews, where he thinks he's really self-centered and he's trying to figure out who he would be in the real world. But a lot of his choices overall make him a very considerate person, sort of empathetic.
I think
go ahead.
There was a definite theme of love that was kind of interwoven throughout the whole book in his different relationships with, both of his parents, especially his mother, because he kind of blames his mother's cancer at a point on his father, and kind of saying that the cancer was caused maybe by her constant worrying about the dad being a recovering alcoholic, and he would be gone from time to time, and her worrying about where he was, and how they were going to pay bills and all this kind of stuff. And also, even with his father, there was an element of love, because all the kids were willing to do anything that they had to do. So maybe not necessarily through the dialogue in the book, but definitely through actions I saw love. And even beyond that with Toph, how both Beth and Dave took care of their brother, and also kind of an obscure character, but John, was like a friend of his and was like just more of a mess than Dave was. You know, on and off drugs and wanting to commit suicide and things like that. And even though the dialogue there was that he hated him, he would still go to his defense and still go and rescue him from all these dire situations that John got himself into. So I definitely think love was interwoven, maybe not necessarily through the words, but definitely through the actions of all their lives.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I just want to end with this was what we've done the last, I don't know, 5 weeks, 6 weeks together. Maybe just those of us who have been around talk a little bit about has it been a good exercise to try to engage culture as a text and try to analyze it in some way, and maybe some of the benefits that you've seen from it. Personally, just being able to hear from other people about things that are meaningful to them and how it might apply to faith in some way moving forward. So if anybody has anything to share about that.
I've enjoyed it, personally.
Yeah, I liked it too. I mean, it's kind of like a reflective exercise for us, just to kind of look at what really in our culture kind of reflects our Christian culture and what doesn't, and kind of, I don't know. I like taking a look at what we are as just kind of like a people in general, like what our country is doing. If that makes any sense.
I think it helps us get to know each other better too, like in what really is important to us in our own lives.
Yeah, I think it helps as far as understanding people, and sometimes we find it hard to interrelate past a point because we don't know where people are coming from, and in some way listening to a song that someone finds meaningful, or reading a book that they find meaningful, or watching a film that they find meaningful in some way lets us in a little bit more than just talking to them, and we can gain insight about another human being that we wouldn't have any other way. And it also gives us a point of reference to talk about stuff in a different way, as opposed to when you engage the Bible. Sometimes you feel like you have to stay within the parameters of Christianity to talk about it. As opposed to this, we can just talk, and we can find Christ within that, as opposed to forcing it. You can just see strands of, themes that apply to faith in some way, and how we deal with stuff, and how we, are engaging with one another. I feel like one of the main points, and one of the things why it's important to do cultural exegesis, is we so many times pigeonhole people to being a certain kind of person based on the stuff that they watch and listen to and read, and we're so much more than that. And there's a depth to understanding why we do the things we do culturally that helps us understand each other and moves past that surface level. And that's very difficult to do with a group that a majority of you have been meeting together for years. And for people who are new to our group, it gives them a chance, hopefully, to become a part of that inner circle, as opposed to, if we're talking about stuff that we all did this weekend together and some of us didn't do that, it leaves us out, as opposed to if we read a book that someone brought and we in some way want to understand a person that we don't know, we're able to read that and hopefully gain insight without having to spend all this time with them. Hopefully gives the space for all of us to share and be able to know that our voice matters here, and that it's important what we have to say and what we have to offer. And it's not just one person's voice that matters, that all of our voices matter. It makes a difference in our community. So hopefully it's been a good exercise for those of you who were not able to join us weekly. I hope that you'll listen to the podcast or watch the videos and try to catch up and engage cultural exegesis a little bit. I think it's one of those things that we should continue to use as we continue to watch TV and watch movies and listen to music and read books. Try to engage it that way. Don't reduce stuff to, oh, this sucks. I don't normally like this. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to watch it. Instead, try to engage stuff based on a cultural exegesis point of view. And hopefully we can find Christ in the midst of our culture as opposed to just staying in our little Christian bubble and thinking that's the only place Jesus shows up. All right, so that's it for me and cultural exegesis. Jaina, why don't you tell us what you're thinking about and what we'll be doing over the next couple of weeks?
So the next 4 weeks, we're going to focus on spiritual disciplines. I haven't decided which because there are lots of them that we could focus on, so we might do 5 to 10, something like that, maybe 2 each week or something to focus on. So I'm looking forward to that. I think it's something that's important to think about in our lives that most of us don't take the time to do. So that's what we're going to do.
So Jaina will be leading us for the next 4 weeks. Anybody have anything we should be praying about?
Just continue to pray. Housing
sorry.
and school.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Housing and school for Jaina.
Yeah.
Imla?
There was a delegate yesterday that fell down some stairs and broke his hip, and he had to be taken to Jackson to the hospital for surgery. So just be in prayer for him. I'm not aware of his name, but he was lifted up in prayer today and could, I'm sure, use as many prayers as he possibly could.
Hi, Ella. Anybody else have anything we should pray about?
Pray for Dotsie. She's doing much better, but she's a little nauseous lately, so we're kind of trying to figure out what it is. And then her sister is 13 years older than her, and we think she has some form of dementia or Alzheimer's. We're just trying to figure that out, and she got, what's the word? She hasn't really retired, but they kind of said, you don't need to come back. She's a lawyer in Huntington, Tennessee, and so she's not very willing to go to doctors, and my mom's worried about her because we can't do anything here. My cousin's not dealing with it well, and so we're just trying to figure out what to do with her. So.
Pray safe travels for the youth choir and the sanity of the adults.
In Trenton.
Yeah.
Safe travels for Trenton.
Some of you may, I don't know, I've told you some of this already, but I have potentially, or I'm pretty sure I'll be having to make a very big decision probably in the next week or so. I gotta jump through a couple more hoops before it's like I'm definitely going to have to make this decision, so it'll be pretty difficult. So it's like kind of exciting because potentially I could be coming back to Memphis, yay. But at the same time, it's kind of, I don't know, I'd feel really terrible about it at the same time just because I've like done something here this year. So like to leave that would be pretty tough. So we'll see. Just yeah. Hopefully the right thing.
Carpe diem, Mo.
Carpe to Memphis, Mo. Yeah, whatever.
This group is a little one-sided in our views. Sorry, Mo.
Yeah, I know. I understand. I mean, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I know what I would do, but it's still like, I don't know. It's still difficult at the same time. So we'll see what happens. But
I think that's cool that it is a difficult decision.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not that you've gained some comfortability where you are.
Right. I mean, it's been a difficult year, but like looking back, there's been like a lot of good that's happened, so that's why it's been tough. But
It'll be hard to move. You know, it looks like you have at least one picture on the wall.
Yeah, right. You got some furniture. Yeah, that one picture is huge, but no.
Anybody else have anything?
He gonna put that cereal.
Okay. All right. Well, I will pray us out. God, we thank you so much that we're continuing to gather together and trying to, in some way, find you in every aspect of life, not just to stay in our Christian bubbles and think that you only exist within our scripture readings and our prayers and through church. But God, you exist in all of life because that's where you are, and that we can find you in the funniest of places. We can find you in movies, and we can find you in TV shows and books and music, and it doesn't even have to say that you're our Savior for us to find you in it. It can talk about all types of stuff because you're in all of life. We pray for one another as we continue to journey to figure out our path and where you want us, and we pray, God, that you'll continue to show us how we can come together as a group and serve you more and more each and every day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you guys for sharing and being here. Bye, Ella.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Lot.
Bye, Bo. Bye, Mike.
Bye.
Have fun in Kentucky, Lot. Bye.
Bye.